Hello guys, Bassus here, and welcome to my Legion 7.3.5 Fury Warrior PvP guide. As the title of this video suggests, this is going to be more of a basic guide, so it's kind of intended for someone that's a little bit newer to the class, just looking to get their feet wet with Warrior and PvP. So we're not going to be going over anything too crazy, we're just going to kind of stick to the basics. Hope you guys enjoy. Just a little disclaimer before we get started, this is my first ever attempt at making a class guide like this. So if you think I did a poor job explaining something, or I could have explained something differently, anything like that, please let me know. I'd really appreciate some constructive criticism so I can improve for next time. Okay, so first off, what does the Fury Warrior bring to the table? Why should you play a Fury Warrior? The most glaring weakness with the class is the fact that there's virtually no utility whatsoever. You don't really bring anything to help your team in the form of CCs or defensive cooldowns or anything like that. But what you do bring is a shit ton of damage and burst. So if you like being the MVP, you know, the guy on the top of the leaderboards in the battleground that just runs in with two huge swords and beats the shit out of everyone, then the Fury Warrior is for you. But if you like being more of a team player, then you're probably not going to be able to find that in the Fury Warrior. So keeping that in mind when we're choosing talents, we're really going to want to try choose ones that improve our burst capabilities, because most of our kills as a Fury Warrior will come during those burst windows. So in the first tier here, it comes down to Endless Rage or War Machine, and the choice really depends on what kind of PvP you're doing. If you're doing Battlegrounds and you're able to maintain a high uptime on this buff by getting a lot of honorable kills, then War Machine can be really strong, be a lot of fun to use. But if you're doing arenas, for example, you're not able to get as many honorable kills, you can't really get the buff as consistently, then Endless Rage is nice because it just gives you nice consistent rage generation, lets you get off more rampages, stuff like that. In the second tier here, it kind of comes down to personal preference between Shockwave and Stormbolt. I like to use Stormbolt, but Shockwave can be really useful if, for example, you're playing a team with two melee DPS in arenas. This lets you have an easier time peeling both of them off your healer, for example, or if you're in BGs, or able to stun a big group of people. I prefer Stormbolt. It just comes down to whatever you're doing, personal preference, they're both viable. In the third tier here, your choice is pretty much always just going to be Avatar. It's a great burst cooldown, and like I said, we really want to try improve our burst. The other two options just really they don't stack up in comparison, so you're pretty much always going to want to take Avatar here. In the fourth tier here, these are basically just defensive talents. I prefer Warpaint, and that's what I would suggest you use if you're new to the class. Basically, it's a nice consistent talent and helps you play a little bit more aggressively as you take less damage while you're enraged. But if you're really hurting from mobility and you find that you're getting kited a lot, for example, you can always try Bounding Stride. I've also seen people get usage out of Furious Charge. I've personally never really liked it, but it can be useful if you want to get a little bit more healing out of your Bloodthirst, and that can actually synergize really well with some honor talents. You can really turn your Bloodthirst into just an incredible spell. But like I said, if you're new to the class, I'd just stick with Warpaint, and it's probably the most consistent and the best talent in general. In tier 5, we have essentially another mandatory talent in Frothing Berserker. When you reach 100 rage, your damage and movement speed is increased for 6 seconds. So this just adds another little bit of extra damage to your burst window, which is what I've said 3 times, really important to Fury. I would never use anything else in this tier. In the level 90 tier here, I recommend you use Inner Rage. Basically, it just makes your Inner Rage hit harder, increasing your burst potential. If you're looking to play a little bit of a less bursty playstyle and more of, I guess, a passive damage type playstyle, you could use Bloodbath, but I wouldn't recommend it. I would always stick with Inner Rage here. I also think it just makes the class feel a bit more fluid. And lastly, in the final tier here, I think you should always use Reckless Abandon. It improves the duration of one of your best cooldowns in Battlecry. And it also synergizes really well with a talent like Frothing Berserker. So basically you pop this, when you pop Battlecry, you instantly gain that 100 rage, and you instantly gain that 15% extra damage and 30% movement speed. So I would never use anything besides Reckless Abandon in this tier. I wish Bladestorm and Dragon Roar were better. I remember the days when Bladestorm was just godlike, and I used to use Dragon Roar back in the day. It was a lot of fun. But unfortunately, they're just not as good anymore, and I would always use Reckless Abandon. Okay, let's get into the PvP talents now. I would probably just recommend sticking with Gladiator's Medallion in the first tier. It's basically just a standard PvP trinket, but if you're playing a team in arena without a lot of CC potential, you could get away with using Adaptation, but like I said, just stick with Gladiator's Medallion for the most part. The second tier here, your choice is really going to come down to what you're facing in arena. If you're just doing Battlegrounds or whatever, I'd probably just recommend with Reinforced Armor. It just increases your health, which is going to increase the amount of self-healing you do, and as Fury, that's pretty much your only means of survival, is just healing yourself through various spells and abilities. But if, for example, you're playing a team in arena with 2 melee DPS, sparring can be really effective, but for the most part, I would just stick with Reinforced Armor. In tier 3, the choice is going to come down to either Disarm or Death Sentence, and which one you choose is going to mostly come down to who you're facing in arena or just personal preference. So Death Sentence can be really nice in the sense that one of the most frustrating aspects of playing Fury is getting someone really low, but then just not quite being able to finish them. So Death Sentence helps with that by giving your execute a 15-yard range. So if someone's trying to get away from you, you can really shut that down. Also, it's really effective against ranged, obviously, for that same reason. On the other hand, disarm can be really effective against melee players, obviously. So if you're playing a team in arena with 2 melees, for example, then disarm can be a really good choice. Or just if you want to add a little bit more survivability or utility to your game, then I would take disarm. So in tier 4 here, the choice is basically going to come down to whether you want to be the MVP at the top of the leaderboards in the battleground, or if you want to be more of a team player. So Rage Machine increases your rage generation, which increases your damage. Spell Reflection is probably the go-to choice in this tier, I would say, for most situations, especially if you're playing a team with a lot of castable crowd control in arenas. This is really useful. But if you're playing a team without so much castable crowd control, Master and Commander can actually be really good. So the choice here just depends on kind of what you're looking to get out of your PvP experience, I guess, and what kind of team you're up against in PvP. So in tier 5, your choice is going to come down to either Battle Trance or Thirst for Battle. I usually use Battle Trance just for a little bit of extra healing, and it's nice that you can heal yourself while continuing to do damage. But if you're playing, for example, a team in arena with a lot of snares, you could always use Thirst for Battle. It's a really strong spell in that situation. Or if you're just in BGs and you're constantly getting rooted or snared and you're just getting pissed off by that, then you could always try Thirst for Battle. Basically, both of these two are viable, and it just comes down to whatever you prefer. So in the 6th and final tier here, your choice is going to come down to either Endless Rage or Slaughterhouse, depending on whether you want some more damage or some extra survivability. Deathwish sounds cool in theory, but unless you have like 9 pocket healers, it's probably not going to work out well for you. So Endless Rage is good if you want a little bit more damage. It increases the duration of your enrage by 1 second. Whereas Slaughterhouse is good if you want a little bit more healing and survivability. The way this works basically is the more damaged your target is, the lower the cooldown is on your Bloodthirst. So if they're about like 40% or lower, you can essentially just spam it and give yourself a shit ton of healing. And that obviously synergizes really well with a talent like Thirst for Battle. So if you're taking something like Thirst for Battle, then maybe you could try out Slaughterhouse. But if you, like I said, if you want more damage, then I'd probably roll with Endless Rage. Okay, so now that we got all that out of the way, now it's time for the fun part, and that is how you actually kill shit as a Fury Warrior. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you both your burst rotation and your more sustained damage rotation, and with both of those I'm going to give kind of more of an optimal way of doing it, and then a slightly less optimal way that might be a little bit easier to pull off when you're just getting started with the class. So you can kind of choose, maybe start with the easier one, then work your way up into the more optimal one, but it's up to you. Anyways, before we get started with that, I'm going to show you a really simple macro that I think is really important for Fury, and it's basically just your standard burst macro. So all you're going to do is you're going to throw in your battle cry and your avatar, which are the 2 main ones, and if you took Bloodbath you can throw that in as well, and if you have any saltwater potions from the PvP vendor you can throw those in as well. Okay, so first up is the burst rotation, like I said, and the first time we go through this I'm just going to kind of go slowly and explain what exactly is happening. And the first way we'll do it is a slightly more optimal way that you can try out if you're feeling adventurous, I guess, or if you're a little used to the class already. I'm having really bad frame issues here for some reason. Sorry about that. But anyways, so what you're going to do is, before you burst, you're going to want to get 85 rage, essentially. That's the only difference between this and the other one that I'm showing you, basically. So you're just going to charge in. We'll just go through it slowly here. Throw out a Bloodthirst, a Raging Blow. Then once you see your Rampage light up, that's when shit is about to hit the fan. So basically, I'll explain to you what's kind of going on here and how all our talents synergize really well to allow us to destroy people. So you decide this guy's time is up. You feel like he has spent enough time on this earth and that he should die. And you have all your cooldowns and everything up, you're all ready to go. You start off with a Rampage, and what Rampage does is it enrages you. And what Enrage does, it increases your damage and your attack speed. So as soon as you hit that Rampage and you get your Enrage buff, you're going to pop the macro I just showed you, which when you hit that, you get an instant, for 6 seconds you have a 100% critical strike chance from Battlecry, and on top of that, it instantly gives us the 100 rage through the Reckless Abandon, and the 100 rage gives us an extra 15% damage increase, and on top of that we also use Avatar, which would give us another 20% damage. So basically for this really short window, we have a 100% critical strike chance plus all these damage boosts and 100% attack speed. So if that didn't get you fired up, I don't know what will. Now that you kind of have an idea what's going on and how everything synergizes really nicely together, I'll give you the actual rotation. So like I said, the first thing you're going to want to do is build up to 85 rage so that you can use Rampage, then immediately follow that up with the macro, and then immediately follow that with a Raging Blow, Odin's Fury, a second Rampage, and then a second Raging Blow. And the reason we use Raging Blow before Odin's Fury in this case is because doing it in this order allows us to get off 2 Raging Blows, so we just milk out a little bit more damage during this window, and we also have the 150% increased damage to our Raging Blow through this talent. And if you use Odin's Fury first, then you're not able to get 2 of them off. So ideally this is what it's going to look like in full speed. You're going to charge in, build up some rage, and then once you see that rampage light up, you're going to hit it, immediately follow that up with the macro, Raging Blow, Odin's Fury, another rampage, another Raging Blow, and then hopefully they'll be within execute range. You can just smash that execute button and finish them off. But if you want a slightly simpler rotation that's a little bit less optimal but it'll still get the job done, all you really have to do is just charge in, pop the macro, rampage, then either Odin's Fury or Raging Blow. It doesn't really matter the order that you do it in. Then hopefully get an execute if they get low enough. The only thing there is just to make sure, well, it doesn't matter what order you use Raging Blow or Odin's Fury in, but it does matter that you use Rampage first to get enraged. So make sure after you pop your macro and get that 100 rage, you first use Rampage and then follow it up with these two abilities. It's like I said, it's a little bit less optimal, but it'll still get the job done for the most part. Lastly, we'll just go over the sustained damage rotation quickly. And for this, I kind of just hid my other action bars and brought all of our abilities out onto this bar and made it nice and big so it's easy to see what's going on. You'll kind of see why I split it in a second. Basically, these are your main abilities and these are your fillers. These two are your fillers, and execute's kind of just a curious case, so I'll go over that last. But you'll also notice that I don't have Odin's Fury on this bar, and that is because the cooldown of Odin's Fury lines up so nicely with Battlecry that you're only ever going to want to use them together. So you're never going to want to use Odin's Fury unless you're in that burst window with Battlecry. So you're never going to want to use it all willy-nilly. Just make sure you always couple them together. Okay, so now we'll just quickly go over the rotation. The main thing you have to understand about playing Fury Warrior is that the abilities that you decide to use will depend on whether or not you're enraged. If you're not enraged, you always want to become enraged, because that is crucial to your damage. It gives you a huge boost to your damage. And the ways you can become enraged are either through Bloodthirst critical strikes or by using Rampage, which is a 100% chance to make you enraged. Bloodthirst and Raging Blow will generate you rage, and Rampage costs 85 rage. So Rampage is essentially your main rage dump, whereas these two abilities are your main two abilities that will generate you rage. So right now you should see the general list of ability priorities on your screen. I'm just going to kind of talk through it and give you a basic rundown of what's going on. So your number one priority is to use Rampage if Enrage is not active or if you're at 100 rage. Behind that, you should use Bloodthirst if you're not enraged, because like I said, your goal is always to become enraged, which is why if you're not enraged, these two abilities are always priority. And even if you are enraged, you should use Rampage at 100 rage just to avoid capping your rage and having extra rage go to waste. On the other hand, if you are enraged, that's when you want to try and maximize your damage during that window. So you're going to want to try use your hardest hitting spells, which would be something like Raging Blow or Execute, which I'll go over a little bit in a second. So basically, you're just going to keep applying that priority system and using shit as it becomes available here. If none of these three abilities are available, that's when you're going to use one of your fillers, either Furious Slash or Whirlwind. Furious Slash is ideal in the situation where there's no point AoEing. So for example, if you're just fighting someone out in the boons, or you're just on a healer behind a pillar or something, that's when you want to use Furious Slash. But if, for example, the other team is stacked up, or if you're in a BG and there's a big group of people, that's when you want to use Whirlwind if none of these three are available. Like I said, Execute's kind of a curious case. It's really only worth using if you're enraged. So if you're enraged and the target is within that Execute window, they're below 20%, then you're going to want to smash this fucking button and try to finish them. But if you're not enraged, then spells like Bloodthirst and Raging Blow have priority over top of Execute in that situation. I hope that makes at least a little bit of sense. I know I probably didn't do the best job explaining it, so I'm going to leave a link to some websites you can check out in the description if you want maybe a better explanation or just a different explanation. But at the end of the day, if you just hit shit as it becomes available, and if none of these are available, just use your fillers, it's not the end of the world. I mean, I would suggest looking into the priorities, but if you're just getting used to the class, you're still getting your feet wet with the warrior, just hit shit as it lights up, and if nothing is lit up, just use your fillers. You'll get by just fine. Lastly, I'm just going to touch on some other abilities I think you should be aware of, like defensive cooldowns and stuns and stuff like that. So our main stun is going to be either Stormbolt or Shockwave, depending on what you took in that talent tree, obviously, or the talent tier. Other than that, we have Intimidating Shout, which is basically just an AoE fear. Our main slow is Piercing Howl, which is just an AoE slow. It's kind of clunky because it's off the GCD, which makes me miss Hamstring a lot, but what do? Make sure this is on your target as much as possible, because otherwise you're just going to be kited around. So even if it means interrupting your rotation, just make sure you apply this and try to keep it on your target as much as possible. In terms of defensive cooldowns, we have Commanding Shout, which just increases your health and the health of your party and raid members within 30 yards by 15%. And our big one is Enrage Regeneration. which reduces the damage you take by 30%, and Bloodthirst restores an additional 20% health. So that can synergize really well with a talent like Slaughterhouse, which has the potential to reduce the cooldown of your Bloodthirst. You can just spam it when this is active and just basically top yourself off. But even without that talent, it's still a really effective spell on its own. Outside of that, you should be aware of Berserker Rage, which basically just removes fear, sap, and incapacitate effects, and it makes you immune to them if you use it in advance as well. So that's the end of the guide, guys. I hope you found it helpful. Like I said, I know this is very basic, and if you want to learn more, I'm going to leave some links in the description for some websites you can check out. Other than that, like I said, I hope you learned a lot, and I hope you have fun playing your Fury Warrior. See you guys.